Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of A Warrior Spirit, where we let the inner warrior shine in their light. Today, I have the pleasure of Kirstin Smith. Kirstin is a mother, a wife, an author, a speaker, a coach, a woman who wears many hats. But most importantly, she's a giver's heart and all around inspirational person. So I'm excited to have her on the show. And Kirstin, I appreciate your time today, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
As I told you before I turned on the cameras, I interview a lot of people who are authors because in this day and age where you can publish a book just because you can print and send. I haven't read many of those books, but I did make it a point to go buy yours and read yours, partly because of the title and partly because of how honest you are about it online. Your book is Confessions of an Unhappy Housewife: How I Changed My Bullshit Stories to Create a Life I Love. And I'm like, I got to read that book.
It is a little clickbaity, isn't it?
It's like, well, she didn't confess a lot, but she did share her bullshit stories, and there was a great inspiration. And what I love about your book, and we'll post a link so that people can catch it online because they can't catch it in this blind spot. What I love about your book is that it's not just for women. If men actually take the time to read that, they will learn a lot about their spouses that will help improve their life. But what I love about your book and what I found fascinating is that your book is based out of the life you asked to have, because you grew up in a very happy childhood, unlike a lot of us who had, turmoil and triumph. You talk about how happy your childhood was and how great an example it was of your mom, who was home for you as a young girl.
Right.
And you talk about, laying on the counter or the floor and your feet up on the cabinets and you just chatting with life with your mom. And you paint this really Brady Bunch-ish picture of what that looked like.
Yeah.
And so you got the life you asked for, and then you hated it.
Yeah, something was missing, and I didn't
Yeah.
expect that.
Well,
it caught me totally off guard.
But you also gave up pursuit of a PhD. Like, you're a very brilliant woman. I used to work at the Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, and I used to help people get their PhD. So I understand what a PhD candidate entails, but you were doing it in foreign language, Arabic. Like, you wanted to really change the world with your brilliance, and not, I take that back. You didn't want to change the world with your brilliance. You wanted to change your world. So understanding of the culture, because this happened all around 9/11, and you wanted to bust the myths and the phobias by creating more understanding.
Yeah, I always have loved the idea of kind of truth for truth's sake, right? Being able to pursue a topic, research it, and really get to the bottom and understand it and be able to kind of like take it apart. And I've also always been a high achiever. So anything that I ever set my mind to, if I was going to do it, I wanted to be the best at doing it. So having that kind of personality and moving out of, a career path where you get grades or, you've got some kind of marker of how you're doing, some kind of assessment, right? You get promotions or you get a paycheck, even any of these things it's feedback as to how you're performing, to go primarily to being at home and raising kids and kind of, supporting. My husband was taking on the entrepreneurial role at that point. So we owned a gym at the time, when our first was born. And I was primarily the behind the scenes entrepreneur, right? He was doing the glad handing. He was in the gym with the clients, and I was handling, insurance and payments and all the, the back end work. But there was no check-in on how you're doing. There are no, hey, you've got an A+.
Yeah.
Great effort. You're doing great with these kids. It's totally flying by the seat of your pants and, hoping that in 20 years that they turn out halfway decent and that you haven't raised serial killers or something,
Right.
which is a terrifying thought to
Yeah.
not really know how you're doing. And you don't really get those glimpses to be able to figure out how you're doing until much later after the fact. So it was a really difficult change to navigate, I think. And I think a lot of women deal with that as well.
Well, and the fact that you chose, because your husband offered to get you help around the house, he offered to, make your life easier, and that's how he was trying to show that, hey, he appreciates you and cares about you. But you're like, pick up your own fucking socks. Like, you don't have the appreciation for me that I deserve. And you said it in silence, and sometimes not so silence, because you guys had the arguments about it, but you stewed about your plight, even though you had asked for, that's where you wanted to be.
Sometimes we get stuck in these things. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy?
Right.
And I'm stubborn as can be, and I wanted to be right.
Yeah.
For a long time. And I did it at the expense of my own happiness.
Well, what's funny about that is that many people, they would have taken that unhappiness, and they would have either ended the unhappiness and divorced the husband, or they would have really come to a different decision and go, okay, this isn't working for me. What else are we going to do? But you chose a different path. You said, oh, let me have a second child. Oh, let me have a third child. No, let me have a fourth child. Like, you didn't double down on it. You quadrupled down on your misery.
Hey, Daryl, I told you I'm very stubborn. Case in point.
Yeah. Throughout this, because you did have a happy childhood, and you did have a role model in your mother, I imagine you talked to her about some of this.
Yes
Yeah.
and no.
Okay.
So I think that, I talked to my mom, I talked to my friends. There were certain things where, for the lack of a better phrase, there is kind of like this bitchy mommy whine culture now, right? Where it's hard to be around your kids. It's hard to be around your husband. Maybe we kind of treat our husbands like just another kid, right? Not necessarily somebody that we're craving to spend time with, not a best friend, maybe not even a partner. Not to say that's always not warranted, because sometimes maybe they're not behaving like a partner. So it's two-way street though. So there's that element that is just kind of that surface level bitching and a general resentment or a general unhappiness, or sometimes a feeling like stuff isn't clicking. Right. And that was the kind of stuff that people would talk about, but nobody really ever had any solutions. It was just kind of like, let's get together and we'll have a girls' night, we'll have happy hour, we'll go to brunch, and we'll drink mimosas, and everybody will kind of bitch about like their husbands.
Yeah.
The flip side is that the actual like deeper stuff that was wrong, that had to do with like my own sense of personal fulfillment. That's the stuff that I never talked to anyone about, because I think society tells you that, if you're going to commit to being at home and raising kids, being a supportive wife, being a homemaker, all of these things, that like you either have to choose that you're going to do that, or you're going to be a working mom. Right. And I felt this huge sense of conflict because neither one was really cutting it for me. Right. I didn't want to do the thing where, even though I felt not completely fulfilled with what I was doing, and I was frustrated all the time, and I didn't feel like I was showing up as the best version of me because of that, I also didn't want to go drop my kids off at daycare and then like go sit in a cubicle somewhere and then pick them up and be rushing around for dinner, bathe them, put them to bed, and do it all again the next day. I knew I didn't want that. And so that sort of like inner turmoil of how do I navigate these two things? Like, am I just going to kind of feel like this forever? That's the stuff that you don't talk about, because there's an intense amount of guilt that goes along with admitting some of these things.
Yeah, you, in the book, you talk about how, and this is where I believe tribe and circle matter, because even though this was a life that you had chosen, and you had become resentful of it, you felt a sense of guilt if you asked or let your husband, get a housekeeper or someone to come in and, fold the laundry or whatever it is. But then you also hung around other unhappy moms. So it kind of validated your unhappiness, because you were feeding off each other on that, but you were resentful of, well, am I failing because I did ask for this? I can't have someone else in here doing this. That means I've failed, right?
Right.
You were in this duality conflict, when did you discover, because by now you're on child 4, when did you discover that maybe it's partly me as well as him? Like,
Oof. Yeah, that took a while. Because it's always easy to see other people's flaws or where
right.
they're not showing up, right? Because we're very clear on what our needs are. And that was the ongoing frustration that I had, right? It was just, hey, like I work very hard to try to keep things tidy. I spend all day with these kids. I'm doing all of this work. Can you not add to it?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when he didn't pick up dirty socks, when he didn't do X, Y, or Z, and I had to do it, that built that sense of resentment. Right. And so my story became like, he doesn't really care about me. He doesn't care about me because he doesn't value my time. He doesn't value the effort. And because my love language is acts of service, when he'd say, who cares about picking up socks? I'll just hire a housekeeper and then you don't have to do it. That made me even more indignant, right? Because no, I wanted to feel love because I want you to think about the effort that I put forth because that's how I'm showing you my love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to feel like that falls on deaf ears, even something that could just be hired out, then we'll just hire a housekeeper. Like that really undermined kind of how I was loving and how I wanted to be loved. So I hung on to all that and I created all these stories, right? Because your brain will always come up with stories that
Yep.
explain the situation that you're in. And so mine became, he doesn't really care about my goals. He doesn't really value, the effort that I put in. I made the, number one mistake of equating my busyness to productivity,
Right.
right? Without realizing that every single time we introduced a kid into the mix, I needed to level up and I had stopped leveling up. I was still doing the $10 an hour tasks, right? I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sort of ascending into that CEO position of our household to
Yeah.
run things more effectively. I wasn't outsourcing anything. So I didn't start to figure these things out until probably our lowest point in 2019. And that was, I think, where we got to the point where a lot of couples get, where you think, is this actually like, are we going to pull out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It wasn't bad enough for anyone because, like me, my husband's also stubborn. So we were pretty well in it, but we were just in that, like, we were trudging through in that just kind of slog of like, on a scale of 1 to 10, our marriage was like a 4.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
you talk about in that part of the chapter, you talk about these other conflicts because the first baby, you took off the baby weight relatively easy, and then you got pregnant right away again. And so then the second, third didn't come off quite as easy. And then you started feeling and I see this in my wife, she goes into the closet and she breaks down and cries because,
Yep.
her weight is due to an illness that she can't like be in control of, but she goes in there and cries because the clothes don't fit. And then she feels like, oh, I look a certain way, so he's not going to be as attracted to me. But then so you had that going with the baby weight. Then you had he doesn't appreciate me. And then you had I'm not contributing to the household. So if he does do a housekeeper, who am I to take that on? You were like martyring your efforts.
Oh, I was the queen of all martyrs. Yeah.
The queen of all martyrs. But then like, and this is where I see this in my household too. Like, I'll pat her on the ass. Your husband smacks you on the ass. I'll kiss her on the cheek. Your husband kisses you on the cheek. We compliment you in whatever way. But none of that penetrates because it's not your language. He might as well have been speaking Russian, right? You're studying Arabic. He might as well have been speaking Russian
Right.
because it was reflective in his heart. Hey, I'm doing these things to show her, and I can relate to this so well, but you're not hearing it because it's not the right language.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
you
And that,
discovered that he had a language that was way different than yours.
Mhm.
Yeah. How'd you
Yeah.
come to that discovery?
It's funny because even that, we read the love languages book, took the quiz, and then we were just kind of like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Did not actually make any changes, right?
Mm.
It was very surface level. nothing really permeated through. We didn't change behaviors. And that took a while. So eventually, I think it started to kind of sink in. And I realized that this is how I'm loving my family. And if I'm feeling unappreciated, it's not because they don't love me. It's just I'm loving them in a language that's not speaking to them. The same way as when my husband grabs my ass if I'm loading the dishwasher. Like sometimes I want to turn around and stab him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, because I will find it annoying, but he's just trying to express love to me because his primary love language is physical touch.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do two things. One, I had to actively try to love him in his love language. Right. Like, even if I wanted him to chip in and show me acts of service, if he just hired a housekeeper, that didn't count because it wasn't from the heart. Right. Just like if I have sex with my husband, but like I'm not into it, my heart's not into it, I don't make him feel wanted because ultimately that's what he wants is to
Mm-hmm.
feel wanted, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
like I wanted to feel that thoughtfulness behind his actions. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just the empty actions. And I
Right.
think that was the problem for a while, is that I needed to get in the right frame of mind so that I could actually love someone in their love language and not just in my own. Right. And then I also needed to not take everything so personally, be able to recognize when he was trying to make the overture, not get annoyed because it's not my love language, say, oh God, he's really annoying sometime, but I love him and he's trying really hard right now. And that's sweet.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah, I absolutely. And again, my wife and I, this is our second rodeo. So, we still had those lessons to learn that you and your husband are learning the first time through. I applaud the fact that in the midst of it, because you talk about how, it just became roommates. It just became like punching in, punching out, you know,
Yeah.
daily
You go through the
routine.
motions, but there was
Yeah.
no real like vulnerability and connection.
And that was a lengthy period of time in your relationship.
Yeah.
And most people would have just cut the cord and peaced out. You didn't, and he didn't. And you actually went to counseling, and your counselor took like 30 seconds to say, look, here's right.
Yeah, we learned some very, very useful tools that we probably should have learned earlier. But again, being two stubborn individuals,
Yeah.
we just kept doing that dance over and over again until somebody pointed out, you're just repeating the same dance over and over again. So like, let's just break these patterns and then see what happens.
So how long has it been since this book was written? And what made you sit down and write this book?
It's been a little over a year. I published it April of last year.
Okay.
Um, and to be honest, what made me write it was because someone told me that I should write a book. And I joined this mastermind, and one of the coaches said, you should write a book. And I thought, well, that's for all the people in here who, they run 8-9 figure companies. Like they should write a book for sure. Those are for the people in here that do business consulting. Or those are for the people here who have started a cookie company and they franchised it across 15 states. They should write a book. What am I going to write a book about? Right? Like what kind of value can I bring? And so I totally just put it on the shelf for a good year. And in the course of that year, I continued to do a lot of these things. I continued to learn a lot of these lessons. So I was really making a lot of shifts in my life by really investing in myself, right? By joining that mastermind, by being very intentional about who I was surrounding myself with.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the Jim Rohn thing, like surround yourself with 5 people and you're going to be the average of them.
Right.
That was the case in my life. But when I changed the caliber of people that I was surrounding myself with, people that were invested in becoming the best versions of themselves, then I started working on that as well. So as I started coaching women, so we made the transition. We had a brick and mortar gym. We sold our brick and mortar gym. And what I ended up doing was breaking off as sort of a solopreneur. And I started coaching other busy women, busy moms with nutrition and fitness. So So I got a nutrition certification. I already had, various certifications on the fitness side, having owned the gym for 11 years. And it gradually just kind of started when COVID hit. Didn't really plan on it at all, but I figured this is kind of a way that I can help people. Life is in turmoil right now. They don't know what to do. So let's control what we can control. And I started a Facebook group. Here are some workouts every day. I was throwing them out there. Then we were doing some challenges. Next thing you know, I've got like a full-fledged business that I'm building. And, I'm doing one-on-one coaching calls with some of these women. And I'm realizing that it's the same thing over and over again. We've got a lot of the same stories, right? We've got a lot of the same excuses. And these are things that I had figured out, maybe that held me back for a very long time, which, they were my bullshit stories. And being able to kind of coach some of these women through that stuff, I realized that we have a tendency to think that we're really unique.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you're in the thick of things. We think our situation is unique. We think maybe nobody else is going to understand, but all it takes is a little bit of that willingness and that vulnerability to share that story. And people are like, oh my gosh, me too. And that was my experience over and over again, was that women were like, I feel like that. I feel that same way. And I was like, well, maybe this is the value that I can provide then. If I can share this story and I can share, some of these concepts that I go over and over again on these calls with women, then maybe I can help more women if they read my book. And I also, like you mentioned, I kind of hoped that there would be men who were invested in their relationship, but didn't understand how their wife, the mother of young children who's at home with them, feeling stressed out, feeling maybe disconnected, wanting to improve their marriage. I hope that it would be something that they could read as well and kind of get an idea of where their wife was coming from.
Well, I think if they do read it, they can actually not only get that understanding, but they can see themselves in what your husband was doing, because it is a common marital issue and no one is unique about it. But I will tell you from an academic standpoint, more people are going to read your book than ever will read the thesis you would have written for your PhD.
I know.
and you're going to impact way more people without those, 3 letters behind your name. You might eventually go back and get them, but more people are going to read this than that PhD ever.
Without a doubt.
And this was probably easier to write, although the lesson was harder to learn.
Yep. I will say it's funny the way that life works, because years and years ago, I used to work at Lululemon. And this is when I was still working on a PhD. And Lululemon at the time, when they were still a very young company, they were really into culture building. And so we had to do goal coaching sessions. You had to write out your goals and we would print them out and they would go on display, like by the front door of the store. There was accountability for all your goals, all of it. And so I remember when I first started working there, I did a goal coaching session with one of the managers, and I closed my eyes and she asked kind of, all these questions, and I craft this vision in my mind. And this is probably 2009, 2010, maybe. And I had this vision of, the house that I lived in and, what the topography looked like. And I had my husband and we had 2 kids, and he was kind of playing football outside with the kids. And I had a little loft in this kind of cabin, fairly rural house that we lived in. And I was just drinking my coffee, watching them play. And then I was going to go up to the loft to finish writing because I was working on a book, because I wasn't teaching that day, but I taught at a university nearby. So like I had all these things that, with the trajectory that I was on, made total sense, right? This is supposed to be my 10-year vision. So that came and went. And I was like, man, I was way off with that vision. My life doesn't look anything like that. And then I realized probably about a year, maybe 2 years ago, I had that vision kind of pop back into my head. And I realized, okay, I wrote a book just like in that 10-year vision. And I have 4 kids instead of 2 kids, right? But
well, you're an overachiever.
Outside, like
you always said you're an overachiever.
Overachiever. I love it. I can see my husband throwing my kids in our pool in the backyard. And I get to teach on a regular basis, which is something that I love to do. Like I love sharing knowledge, and I love seeing people like click and that light bulb comes on and they get it.
Mhm.
Love that process. I loved it personally. So I love being able to help other people with that process. And so like I'm doing the stuff that was in my vision. Like
Yeah.
I'm still teaching in a different setting. I wrote a book about something completely different that I didn't think I was ever going to write a book about, but yet setting that vision still took me there. It's just the details were a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's the thing about mindset and manifest. Because when I coach my clients, it's about, mindset, getting over the limiting beliefs, and how we never, rise above our own self-image. But I also have to make them aware that the package to which you're asking comes in isn't always going to be in alignment with how you're putting it out there. The essence of what you're asking for is going to be the same, but the package may be wrapped differently because source, creator, God, however anyone wants to look at it, has a bigger vision for our life than we have for ourselves.
Yeah.
So the package is different because the benefit is better and bigger and different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you guys sold your gym now, and this is what I love about, there's very little that I love about COVID, but this is what this is what I do love about COVID. It showed that nutrition, like health, starts in the kitchen, not in the gym. It starts in the brain and the mind and how we feel ourselves, not in how many weights we can push. And so I love that you had to transition out of a brick and mortar, and you're still able to help these women with their nutrition and their body image and their stuff, because that's all in the brain.
Yeah.
And that it's one of the very few things I love about COVID, but it allowed people that inner development and that personal development. When you guys sold the gym, now your husband worked very hard in this. It was his passion. You initially hated it, and now you found time to love it, because you used to use your free time that he was giving you to go to the gym, and instead you'd go get a pedicure or drink a latte. Like,
Yeah. I just needed alone time. I needed to turn
yeah,
off all of the inputs for a little
right.
while.
Yeah. So now that he sold it, what's your husband doing?
So we were already doing real estate investment.
Okay.
Um, we had gotten to a point where the gym kind of ran itself. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
go there on a daily basis. He would go there, I don't know, maybe weekly and drop in. Neither one of us worked out there. So it was its own business on the side. Got to the point where, I don't know, it didn't really bring anybody joy. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
kick off enough money to deal with the employee hassles when they did arise.
Mm-hmm.
So we just decided it was time to pivot to something else. So I like to tease him. I say he's retired, but real estate investment primarily. So
Yeah.
from there, because we were already, gosh, when I met him years ago, he was in mid-20s and he bought a 6-unit apartment complex. So this has kind of been his thing on the side for as long as I can remember. I guess the last almost 20 years. And so he also did some consulting for a Canadian company that specializes in coaching micro gyms.
Oh,
And
nice.
he created a sort of their upper tier mastermind for people who had, multiple locations. Gyms were grossing significant amount of money, and they needed to find some wealth building strategies at that
Mm-hmm.
point to, maybe they wanted to get net worth of $1 million as a gym owner. Okay, well, what does that look like? So he coached those guys. They ascended, gosh, at this point, he's been doing that for the last few years. And I think they've got close to 30 people
Nice.
that have ascended into net worth that's at least in excess of $1 million. And now
Nice.
he does personal business coaching as well for individuals, kind of emphasizing, like when I coach, I do my sort of 3 legs of the stool, right? It's got
Yeah.
to be nutrition, fitness, and mindset, and they go together. I don't separate things out. I won't just do nutrition. I won't just do workouts. It's like, that's my way or the highway, right? Other
Yeah.
people will do things other ways. And he kind of coaches on like a 4 F's thing, and it's family, fitness, freedom, and finances.
Nice. So a couple questions on that. When your husband read the final printout, having lived it, what was his reaction to it?
I don't know. I'll tell you when he reads it.
Oh, he hasn't even read it.
He hasn't. I tease him about this all the time because I'm like, oh, you would know that if you read my book. And to get him
I've
to
read your
pick up,
book and he hasn't read your book. Oh my
dude,
gosh.
it's like a 2-hour read. It's a super, super fast read, but he's a very slow reader and he never reads physical books. He will knock out like 3 audiobooks while exercising in a week, but he rarely, unless he's doing something like 75 hard and it stipulates that you have to read a physical book. So he teases me back. He says he's holding out for the audiobook version.
So you put it in audio and then hand him the download. Like, here is my book.
Right.
Like, I literally watched it watching the NBA finals. Like, I mean, it's like, it's an easy read. It's a great read. I didn't want to put it down. It really, it's a great read if you're in the mindset of, I really need to do my part in this relationship and I need to validate my partner from both sides of the pen. So I see you on stages. What are you traveling around talking about, and what are your primary speaking gigs these days?
Oddly enough, I came to the realization I did too much last year.
Oh,
Yeah, too much. So we do annual planning at the end of the year. And usually right after Thanksgiving, we go away for, a couple nights and sort of revisit our goals for the year. How did we do? How did we perform? How happy are we? What do we want to accomplish over the next year? And, I realized I was just doing too much and I was feeling like I wasn't really nailing the stuff that I wanted to nail. I had Zoom calls all day long. I was traveling a lot for events and my kids were learning, when I told them to go eat their breakfast and I made them breakfast, that if they didn't want to eat it, they could just kill 20 minutes until mom goes into the office for her next Zoom call. And then we can just eat whatever we want in the pantry. Right? Like they're no dummies. They know how to work this. So I realized that I wanted to get more intentional this year. So I spoke a couple weeks ago at Women of Apex in Dallas, women only event, entrepreneurs, stay-at-home moms, wives of entrepreneurs, moms, single ladies, older ladies, everybody across the board. And we did Q&A session, and I generally speak for a lot of them. What we talked about was the issue of self-confidence, right? That idea of when you wear a lot of hats, it's really easy. If you're not really cognizant, you can lose that sense of self very easily. Right. And when you lose your sense of self, your self-confidence goes right with it.
Yeah, I heard another female coach say a couple things. She said, you can be good at everything, but you can't be great at everything. So you have to pick what you want to be great at and not just good at. And then she said, a lot of us, and this goes back to what you just said, a lot of us are starting to live a life death by coffee. Like, we're always in a Zoom meeting. We're always at a virtual coffee. Like, you have to pay more attention to the no's that you say than the yeses, because the no's make you more intentional about what you're going to say yes to, because otherwise you have death by coffee. And it's interesting. And to clarify, you don't just go away. Like, it's not a family vacation. You and your husband alone go and work on your goal setting.
Yeah, for annual planning, it's just the two of us.
Yeah. And that's very intentional and very important, because it's not, hey, let's gather up the kids and get away and go do this. It's you and I, because in one of your chapters is, are you running your household like the CEO of your life? And I think that's a very important mind shift, because earlier in our discussion, you talked about those $10 tasks, right? And we get so bogged up into the $10 tasks, right? I follow Dean Graciosi, who's Tony Robbins' business partner, and Dean was trying to explain to his mother, why do you have a housekeeper? Why do you have this? Why do you have that? And he's like, because, and he basically said, for that same $20 that I'm paying that person for the hour, I can go do something that makes me $1,000.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, get that housekeeper, right?
Yeah. But that's easy to conceptualize when you have that income, Right.
Right.
So my husband got that concept, no problem. He understood outsourcing. He understood, bringing on staff to take over those $10 an hour tasks so he could go do $1,000 an hour tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, because I didn't sign my paycheck.
Right.
Right. So that was the difference, because which it was all my perspective. My perspective was just wrong, because I looked at it as, now I'm costing money instead of adding value.
Yeah.
Right. Because what am I going to do? But ultimately, and I give my husband full credit on this, because he finally pushed me to the point where I could understand it, that my kids, when they get older, like, you talk about being great at things versus being good at things. So I want to be a good mom, or do I want to be a great mom? Like, I want to be a great mom.
Yeah.
I would not have created all these little human beings if I was not fully invested in them turning out to be good people. And this life is super short,
Mm-hmm.
right? My oldest is now 10. She's going to be 11 by the end of summer. Think about, like, how many summer vacations do you have,
Right.
right? How long until they leave home and they go out on their own and they got to make all these decisions? And then how often are they going to come home after that?
Yep.
Right. Next thing you know, you're 89 years old. And would you go back and clean the kitchen less, or
Yeah.
hire the laundry lady, if it meant that, like, you could have more park dates with them when they were little?
Yeah. I heard a great story. I'm a baseball fan and I grew up in the Midwest. So the Minnesota Twins were, some people, and they had a catcher named Joe Mauer, who was going to be a future Hall of Famer, but he was a phenomenal baseball player. But he told a story of when he was little, he and his brothers were wrestling around on the front yard, and his mom yelled at them to not get their clothes dirty and to not ruin the grass. And the father turned to the mother and said, "Are we raising grass or are we raising boys?"
Oh, yes.
And like, discussion was done,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to, and you point out very clearly in the book, we can all earn extra money if we try, but we can't earn extra time. And the time is way more valuable. And I try to impart this to my wife, and we've had this discussion in the past. She's a stickler like you were, perfectionist, have to get things done all in. And I have to remind her, like, for what you're spending to do that, your time is more valuable if you focus it over here. Like, it's not worth the $10 you're going to save
Right.
because you did it yourself. You're far more valuable doing your skills elsewhere.
And
And
it's
I
not always monetary. That
no,
was my hang up.
yeah, it's not always monetary. But the value concept, is still hard to learn, especially when you don't bring in the money and you don't have the income and you have that mom guilt, and I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be doing it all. You're supposed to be superwoman, and so you get up in your head and you get these hangups. So you're cut back your speaking, but last year when you were speaking a lot, was it mostly on your book, or were you talking about other things as well?
But same concepts that I
Yeah.
cover in the book. Yep.
Okay. And so what lie ahead for you and your husband and your family now this coming year? What are your major, because by the time this comes out, it'll be almost 2024, going into the fourth quarter of 2023. So what is on the horizon for the Smith household?
Okay, this will be fun then, given that timing.
Yeah.
So we decided that we want to get out of the city. We are in Houston, and we are in Houston. We are in the city. And my kids are homeschooled now. That was
Mhm.
another thing that came out of COVID. And we like it a lot less after living here during COVID.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's a lot of perks to living in a big city for us. We want to, we've got a nice house, we've got a nice lot, we've got a pool, but we want acreage.
Mhm.
So we want to get somewhere outside of town and get some acreage, be able to, ride around on our four-wheelers and go fishing. My husband hunts frequently, hunt our own land, stuff like that. But it's also a huge headache to try to sell your house and then arrange where you're moving. Do you have to do a lease back with the new buyers? And that whole thing is a mess every time we do it. So what I think the Smiths are going to do, hopefully by the end of 2023, is we are going to sell our house here in the city, and we are going to take 6 to 12 months in an RV, and
Okay.
we are going to kind of take this shit show on the road for a while and do some long adventures while we figure out where our next little homestead will be.
I'm smiling from ear to ear because I have a friend who they just moved to Flagstaff. But they spent, let's see, they had 4 kids
Mhm.
and a dog and the 2 parents, and they spent 5-ish years in an RV doing exactly what you just said. And they
Yep.
just now are coming off the road. But she would post these school days where they're at Yosemite Park learning about whatever, and it's like school
Yeah.
day. Or they're at the beach and they're learning about, the ocean and the whales, but it's a school day. Like they were living their best life from the road because they homeschooled their kids, and they figured it out in this, RV lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so I just grinned from ear to ear that you're going to attempt that and do that, because I
We've
think,
done short ones before. So we normally do in the summer, we do about a month in our
yeah,
RV, and we go up to the Midwest and go visit family and stuff. And, when we do those trips, that's when my kids, like, it sparks something. They get some new interest, and that
yeah,
usually guides kind of what we're doing for social studies, history, science. Like
yeah,
if we do a week out in Big Bend and we
yeah,
go hiking, and they'll get turned on to, the volcanoes and the dinosaurs. And then when we come home, we got to hit the library and get all the books on volcanoes and dinosaurs.
yeah.
And they just consume all that information because they're interested in it. Right. So
Yeah.
having that freedom to kind of follow their interests makes school so much easier.
Well, I love that. And it's ironic because now and I'm considerably older than you and your husband, but I now also want to live a laptop lifestyle where I'm not confined to any house, any place, anything. I can do it anywhere that I feel like my feet need to be in the sand today. Okay, do my business
Yeah.
from there, right? So I love anyone and as a younger man, I used to travel all over the United States. I used to literally throw a dart at a map and move every couple of years wherever it landed.
Oh my gosh.
So I love anyone who's got that adventurous spirit and heart, because there's so much to this country,
Mhm.
and we normally see it flying over it. But when you really, when I was mid-20s, I spent 30 days traveling from coast to coast. So I started off in Dallas because that's where I was living at the time. Went out to Charlotte, drove out to Seattle and back to Dallas. And I just did this big loop.
Oh,
And
that's
this was
fun.
before cell phones,
Yeah.
before, everything, Rand
That's
McNally map.
very adventurous.
Yeah. So spent many a night on the roadside, rest area and whatever. So anyone who has that adventurous spirit, I think it's amazing. And the memories that your kids will gain from it are going to
Yeah.
make them better little human beings and less likely to be those serial killers that you might be worried about.
God willing.
God willing. I've enjoyed, this time with you today. It's been very fun for me. I ask you 2 questions, and I ask this of all my guests. If someone were in the situation you were in, what's the number one tip you would give to help propel them out so that they don't end up in divorce in the statistic pile?
Stop thinking that you are a victim of the circumstances.
Mm,
Understand that you are creating your life. And if it's great, then fantastic. Pat yourself on the back because you created that. And if it's a little subpar, then that's also okay. Because when you are 100% in control and responsible for all those things, then you're the person in charge of fixing it.
mhm. You are truly the CEO of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And the last question that I ask all my guests, because you're in my tribe and in my warrior spirit family, what does a warrior spirit mean to Kirstin?
Mm. think probably an unwillingness to quit. I mean, I've referred to myself as stubborn
Yeah.
several times now over the better part of an hour. But there's an element of being really stubborn, right? When something's not working, figuring out what isn't working and then make it work. Not giving up when you feel defeated.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out how you can take a situation that may seem terrible and find the good in it so that you can essentially be victorious on the other side.
I love that. We will drop a link to your book and to your group so that people can reach out and find you. And you know, if they have any questions or want to just connect, it's a fabulous book. I hope that everyone reads it. And it's just been my pleasure and honor to have you here today. And I wish you and your family the utmost success.
I appreciate it so much. I'm going to take that little clip, by the way, and send it to my husband.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tell him that it's highly recommended for all men, including husbands
Exactly.
of the author, to read. You have a blessed rest of your night, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a great night.
Bye.